The courtroom air hung thick, heavier than a Mississippi summer, every cough and shuffle echoing off the mahogany paneling. Judge Robert Harrison, a man whose reputation for courtroom theatrics rivaled his supposed legal acumen, leaned back in his oversized leather chair, a smirk playing on his lips. His courtroom was his kingdom, and he ruled it with an iron gavel and a tongue sharper than a freshly honed Bowie knife. Defendants walked in already defeated, their hopes crushed under the weight of his legendary disdain. Today was no different, or so it seemed. Then, she walked in. Detective Imani Carter. 30-something, dressed in a crisp, tailored suit that screamed quiet confidence, not desperation. She moved with a grace that belied the tension crackling in the room, her eyes meeting Judge Harrison's with a steady, unflinching gaze. He'd expected, well, he wasn't sure what he'd expected. Someone cowed, maybe. Someone pleading. Definitely not this woman, who stood before him like she was assessing him, not the other way around. He cleared his throat, the sound amplified by the microphones, a deliberate power play. "Ms. Carter," he drawled, the condescension dripping like poison honey. "Or should I say, Detective Carter? Quite the wardrobe change from your usual uniform, wouldn't you say?" A ripple of nervous laughter went through the gallery, his usual sycophants eager to play their parts. Imani didn't flinch. A ghost of a smile touched the corner of her lips, a hint of something dangerous lurking beneath the surface. "Judge Harrison," she replied, her voice calm, steady, cutting through the manufactured tension like a laser. "Always a pleasure to be in your esteemed presence." The faintest emphasis on esteemed hung in the air, a subtle challenge that only the truly attentive would catch. But Judge Harrison caught it, and something flickered in his eyes, a flicker of unease he quickly masked with a louder, more theatrical laugh. He was used to controlling the narrative, but this woman, this Detective Carter, she was rewriting the script in real time. He just didn't know how much yet. The temperature in the courtroom seemed to drop 10 degrees as Imani Carter stepped forward, the click of her heels sharp and deliberate on the polished floor. "With all due respect, Your Honor," she began, her voice resonating with a newfound steel, "there seems to be a slight misunderstanding regarding my presence here today." She paused, letting the words hang, the silence amplifying the growing unease in the room. Judge Harrison, for the first time since she'd entered, actually looked uncertain. The smirk was gone, replaced by a thin, tight line around his mouth. "Misunderstanding?" he echoed, his voice losing some of its swagger. "Ms. Carter, you are here to answer to charges of obstruction of justice. Charges, I might add, brought forth by the esteemed district attorney's office. Hardly a misunderstanding." He tried to regain control, but the edge in his voice was unmistakable. Imani reached inside her jacket, a slow, deliberate movement that drew every eye in the courtroom. She pulled out a leather wallet, flipped it, open, and held it up for the entire room to see. A silver badge gleamed under the harsh courtroom lights. "Detective Imani Carter," she stated, her voice ringing with authority. "Internal Affairs Division, Special Investigations Unit." A collective gasp swept through the gallery. The carefully constructed tension of the courtroom shattered, replaced by a raw electric shock. Judge Harrison's face went white, his eyes wide with disbelief. The prosecutor, seated at his table, choked on his water, sputtering and coughing. Even the court reporter's fingers froze above the stenotype machine. "Internal Affairs?" Judge Harrison stammered, his voice barely a whisper. What is the meaning of this?" His carefully cultivated facade of power was crumbling faster than a condemned building. Imani's calm demeanor never wavered. "The meaning, Judge," she said, her voice now carrying a sharp edge, "is that I'm not here as a defendant. I'm here to investigate allegations of judicial misconduct." "Allegations," she emphasized, her eyes locking onto Judge Harrison's, "that directly involve you." The courtroom erupted. Murmurs turned to gasps, gasps to excited whispers, then a full-blown roar of disbelief and excitement. Reporters scribbled furiously, sketching pads filled with frantic lines. The bailiff, a man who'd seen it all, looked like he might actually faint. Imani raised her voice slightly, cutting through the chaos. "For too long," she declared, her gaze sweeping across the stunned faces in the gallery. "Those in power have operated with impunity, believing they are above the law. Prejudice, bias, abuse of authority. These are not just buzzwords, Judge. They are cancers eating away at the heart of our justice system. And today," she turned back to face Judge Harrison, her eyes like chips of obsidian. Today, the reckoning begins. The courtroom was a pressure cooker, the tension so thick you could taste it. Imani Carter stood her ground, a solitary figure challenging the entrenched power of Judge Robert Harrison, and, by extension, the entire system he represented. Her words hung in the air, each syllable a hammer blow against the foundations of the courtroom's established order. Accountability, Imani continued, her voice resonating with unwavering conviction, is not a suggestion, Your Honor. It's the bedrock of justice. It means that no one, regardless of their title or position, is exempt from scrutiny. It means that the scales of justice must be blind, not just in theory but in practice. Blind to race, blind to gender, blind to social standing. But in this courtroom, she paused, letting the silence amplify her point. Blindness has been selective. Prejudice has been the lens through which justice has been administered. She gestured to the gallery, her voice rising with passion. Look around. You. How many times have you seen justice denied, delayed, or distorted because of who someone is, not what they've done? How many lives have been shattered, dreams extinguished, because the system, designed to protect, has instead become a weapon, in the hands of the biased, the arrogant, the corrupt? Judge Harrison slumped in his chair, his face ashen, tried to interrupt, to sputter some semblance of authority, but no sound came out. He was a man deflated, his power stripped bare in the harsh light of Imani's accusations. The prosecutor, finally regaining his composure, jumped to his feet, his face flushed. Your Honor, he stammered, addressing the silent judge. I request a recess. This changes everything. His urgent tone spoke volumes. The charges against Imani Carter, flimsy from the start, were now exposed as a desperate and spectacularly failed attempt to silence an inconvenient truth. Imani's words resonated deeply within the courtroom, a seismic shift in the power dynamics. The tense atmosphere, once oppressive and weighted in favor of Judge Harrison, now crackled with a different kind of electricity. The anticipation of change, the hope for real justice. The prosecutor's panicked plea for a recess wasn't just about procedure. It was an admission of defeat, a tacit acknowledgement that the game had irrevocably changed. The principle was stark and undeniable. Justice, to be worthy of the name, must be impartial. It cannot be a commodity to be bought, sold, or dispensed based on the whims and prejudices of those in power. This courtroom, once a symbol of Judge Harrison's unchecked authority, had become ground zero for a revolution. Imani Carter reiterated the point, her voice clear and firm. True justice, she stated, addressing the silent courtroom, sees no color, no creed, no class. It sees only the facts. It weighs evidence, not assumptions. It protects the innocent and holds the guilty accountable, regardless of who they are. Moments later, the charges against Detective Imani Carter were dismissed, the prosecutor practically tripping over himself to withdraw them. The courtroom erupted in chaos. Cheers, gasps, and shouts of disbelief filled the air. Reporters surged forward, a tidal wave of microphones and notepads engulfing Imani. The gallery, a mix of ordinary citizens and stunned court personnel, buzzed with excited chatter, the emotional release palpable. Word had already reached the Chief Justice. An urgent call was placed to Judge Harrison, the details of which were not public, but the grim expression on his face as he listened spoke volumes. His reign was over. His career, built on intimidation, and ego, was crumbling in real time, leaving him exposed, vulnerable, and publicly humiliated. The courtroom incident ignited a firestorm. News of Judge Harrison's exposure and Imani Carter's courageous stand spread like wildfire through social media and traditional news outlets. Justice for Imani. Accountability now. End judicial bias. Hashtags trended nationally, fueling a national conversation about systemic bias within the justice system. Advocacy groups, dormant for too long, roared to life, demanding investigations, reforms, and real consequences for those who abuse their power. Social media became a battleground, a digital town square where the story unfolded in real time. Clips of Imani's courtroom confrontation went viral, shared and reshared millions of times. Public outrage mounted, amplified by personal stories of injustice and bias within the legal system. The incident was no longer just about Judge Harrison. It was about a systemic rot that needed to be excised. In her first televised interview, Imani Carter, poised and articulate, deflected praise and personal vindication. This isn't about me, she stated, her gaze direct and unwavering. This is about the countless individuals who have been silenced, marginalized, and unjustly treated by a system that should protect them. This is about demanding accountability, not just for one judge, but for a system that allows and perpetuates bias. She shifted the focus from individual blame to the urgent need for broader systemic reforms. Judge Harrison, meanwhile, became a pariah. Suspended indefinitely, his past rulings were scrutinized, his career dissected under the harsh glare of public opinion. The fall from grace was swift and brutal, a stark illustration of the growing demand for accountability among public officials. The era of unchecked judicial power, it seemed, was drawing to a close. The story of Judge Harrison and Detective Imani Carter became a case study, a stark illustration of the complexities of justice and accountability within the American judicial system. It exposed the insidious nature of bias and the urgent need for reform, highlighting the devastating consequences when justice is not truly blind. Justice, Imani knew, was not blind when prejudice clouded the eyes of those who were supposed to uphold it. Judge Harrison's downfall, though a victory, was also a sobering reminder of how deeply ingrained these biases were. His censure was a necessary step, but only the first step on a long road to systemic change. Imani Carter, refusing to be defined by the incident, channeled her energy into her work, her determination strengthened by the experience. She became a symbol of resilience, her actions sparking national discussions on reforming law enforcement practices and addressing implicit bias at every level of the justice system. Advocacy organizations seized the momentum, pushing for policy changes, demanding mandatory bias training for judges and law enforcement, and advocating for independent oversight bodies to hold public officials accountable. The individual story of Imani Carter and Judge Harrison had become a catalyst for societal reform, a testament to the power of courage, truth, and the unwavering pursuit of justice. The fight was far from over, but for the first time in a long time, there was a glimmer of hope that true justice, impartial and equitable, might finally be within reach.